You're listening to the Cooking from Scratch podcast. Today's episode features how the creator of the podcast, yours truly, uses her unique point of view on cooking to teach others how to easily cook from scratch. Hi, I'm Aliye, and with over 15 years of cooking in professional kitchens and at home for my family, this is the first non-cooking cooking podcast that shows you how to make your homemade meals easier and more delicious so you can feel inspired and motivated to cook in the midst of your busy life. We go behind the scenes and tap into the stories and inspiration of chefs, bakers, farmers, and other culinary professionals to reveal what they're up to in their kitchen right now and what their favorite at-home dish is to cook from scratch. This is the Cooking from Scratch podcast.
This is the pilot episode of Cooking from Scratch, podcast brought to you by Aliye. I am Jesse Cohen. I've known Aliye since second grade.
I was telling the story yesterday.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think I have photographs of you and I square dancing in grocery bag.
That's so good.
I don't know what the word for an outfit made out of a grocery bag is, but you and I have known each other a very long time.
Yes.
And I was thinking last night before I went to bed about this conversation we're going to have. And Have you ever seen the movie Ratatouille?
Yeah, multiple times.
Okay, so here's my number one question.
Yes.
As you and I also worked together, I worked for you for 8 years.
Yeah, quite a while.
You and I have spent a lot of time together over the years.
Yes.
And we would go to the farmer's market and we would sit in traffic and we would go and we'd buy all these vegetables and fruits and whatnot.
Right.
In Ratatouille, the main character, for anybody listening who hasn't watched, is a rat who is the finest chef in all of France by the end of the movie. But his cousin is a big dumb idiot who eats garbage and doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
In this crude analogy, you're the main character and I'm the big dumb cousin who eats garbage. And if you ask me, what are you eating? I look at it and I go, I'm not really sure. But in the movie, the main character, he creates these flavor profiles. He combines these ingredients, and in his mind, you see these bursts of color and you hear this music, and it's this incredible experience. And then the cousin eats it, and it's much less explosive color. Right. The music is muffled and muted, and so my takeaway from that was always, it's not that the cousin is an idiot or doesn't appreciate what the main character is doing. It's that his experience is just totally muted.
Right.
So you watched me, eat a bunch of French fries and hamburgers and not anything, sophisticated for 8 years and probably longer. Is the experience that the main character gets in Ratatouille of enjoying that sophisticated combination of flavors,
right,
something innate, or can you build it over time?
I think it's a kind of a combination of both. I mean, there is what they call super tasters, and I'm pretty sure there's science behind that. There are super tasters, people who can taste things more acutely, and people just have more acute senses in general, not just taste. But I also think it's something that you can develop over time, because if you've only eaten a certain type of food over time, or kind of food, or for whatever reason your palate has been super limited and you're just not used to the other stuff. I think if you're really used to really salty foods or really fatty foods or just fast food, then you're not tuned into the kind of nuances of something that's different than that. So I don't know for sure, but I would think that you could develop it over time just by paying attention to it. And if you had an interest in it, and I'm not talking about you, but like a person.
That's fine, I don't.
Yeah, right.
So
like by having an interest in it and wanting to develop your palate. A palate is definitely something that can be developed. And there is also a certain amount of innateness to it from what I understand from the science. That's all I know about it.
Knowing you as long as I do, I know that your palate, I mean, obviously everybody's palate develops differently, but I come from, a family who half of it is from Canada, where they like poutine and ketchup chips, and the other half of it is from Dutch Pennsylvania, a lot of fatty, buttery, salty foods. But your background is significantly different. So what kind of like cultural influences do you feel like you were exposed to earlier in life that might have
Right.
differentiated your experience with food than, you know, the rest of the booger eating kids we went to school with?
Absolutely. Well, I think my Turkish background. So my father was Turkish. So growing up in my household, we were eating hamburgers and French fries on some nights, but then we were eating lentil soup and other traditional Turkish dishes on other nights because my mom, who's American, learned to cook a lot of those different dishes. So I think I was definitely exposed to stuff from an earlier age, definitely. And we would travel as well. We would go to Turkey. And in the 80s, when we were going to Turkey, there were some options, but we would bring a can of peanut butter. And at any point that I didn't want whatever was being served to me that night, it was peanut butter. And the bread's amazing, obviously. So we'd bust out the Skippy. I'd smear it on the bread if I wasn't up for whatever was happening that night, which was usually lamb or meat or some kind of vegetable or rice. I mean, Turkish food isn't particularly spicy or spiced, but you know, I had mixed feelings about it growing up. I wanted the taste of home as a kid, right? Sometimes you're up for trying new things. Sometimes you're like, just give me that Skippy peanut butter and that's it. So I think it definitely was informed by it for sure, but that's only half of my genetic taste buds, right? It goes back to the like, is it something you grew up with or is it something that you're born with? So I think that's how my background informs it. It's just that Turkish part is really something that I learned a lot of my cooking from my Turkish relatives, and I turn back to it a lot of times when I'm for inspiration, I'll say.
You raised the peanut butter thing made me think for any parents who might listen, who might have, I was a picky child,
Right.
and my recollection is that I was never forced to challenge my taste preferences.
Right.
And so you mentioned the peanut butter, and I can't remember if you went to the same day camp as I did over the summers at Cal State Long Beach in the big empty dirt field.
I did.
They gave us lunch, but if you didn't like what was for lunch, there was 2 loaves of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a thing of honey.
Right.
So I just ate peanut butter sandwiches my whole life.
Yeah.
Is that I would have lived with, like, if they just said, no, I'm sorry, you have to eat whatever we're serving.
Right.
I would have been fine, and I probably would have been a much more interesting person for it. So if you have a kid and one of the ways that you want to, well, you do have a kid, but if one has a child and one wants to break the picky eating cycle or just introduce another way that sophistication can enter, and I don't want to use sophistication in like a classist way, but just like in a life is a multivaried thing. How do you force your kid to be more interesting when it comes to food, basically?
I don't know. I'm not the person to ask about that. Right. There are all kinds of ways and techniques of doing this and ways you're supposed to do it and ways you're not supposed to do it to give your kids issues or not issues around food. I don't know any of that. I personally, for my kid, she was very interested from food really early on. So that was ezy. She was at 3 months. She was like, what are you guys eating? We're like, you're 3 months old. Stop looking at what the food going in our mouth. What's happening? So, and we, in our family, and it was kind of a cultural thing, like there was no separate dinner. There was no separate meal for kids. It was like, she was eating what we were eating in small cut up tiny amounts. If I had had a picky kid, I don't know what I would have done. Did I not have a picky kid because I'm not a picky eater? I don't know the answer to that, but what we did for our kid, which is kind of more standard, I think in more old school cultures, like they eat what you eat. There's not like a separate meal. And if they don't, I don't know what happens if they don't like it, to be honest with you, because my kid ate it. So feeding kids is not my specialty at all.
One of the reasons I don't have kids. But as I've gotten older, the more I've come to believe that the way you trick someone into liking something is not to bombard them with external, advertisements or whatever. It's to be enthusiastic about something, and people will see your enthusiasm, and then people are eager to be enthusiastic about other things. It's why if you're driving and there's a crowd on the side of the road, you slow down to look. Or if you're, I walk into work and if there's a bunch of people huddled at a desk all looking animated and I'm like, oh, I want to see, like, curious. So I wonder if just being enthusiastic about it
I think
maybe
that's
because
part
kids
of
want to
it
be part of your
too.
life, right? Everybody
Yeah,
wants
I
to be.
think so. And I think even with adults, like I have more experience with adults being picky eaters. And what
Hmm.
normally comes out if an adult is open to trying something that they have standardly not liked in the past, they will try it. And it's really interesting to watch them try not to like it. And then usually what
Right.
happens, they'll have a story behind, oh, well, I said I didn't like it because, and then the story comes tumbling out. And they're like, oh, well, maybe I would eat this again in the future. And I don't think it's her just being polite in that moment. I think literally they've had a moment of like, oh, maybe I could like this. Maybe I just didn't like it because I had this experience when I was younger. That happened a lot with the vegetables. When we were delivering vegetables,
Yep.
People would cook a beet and eat a beet and they'd have an epiphany and they'd say the only beet I'd ever eaten was in a can or boiled to death and turned to mush. I can't believe this is what beets taste like. So just
I'm
kind of exposing people to
mhm.
that other way that it could be when they have in their mind it's only one way. Beets are mushy or green beans are mushy.
I know I would like shrimp if I ever really tried it.
Right.
But when I was like 4, somehow I don't even really, I mean, I've told myself the story over and over and over again to the point where I don't even believe that it's true. I think it's just
Right.
something I've Xeroxed in my own brain so many times that it
Right.
feels true.
Right.
But I know I've accidentally eaten shrimp thinking it was orange chicken one time, and it turned out it was a shrimp
Right.
dish. And the entire time I was like, this is delicious. This is the best, whatever. And then
Right.
realized, oh no, it was shrimp. It was disgusting. Have
Right.
you ever had a moment? Because I know that you've prepared um, menus for people. I know that you've had a career in professional
Right.
chefery. What do we call it? Is it cooking?
Yeah, I mean,
Feels so
just
dismissive, but
I know. Just I've cooked for a lot of people in a lot of different ways in
food prep,
restaurants, catering, food prep.
different settings. Yeah.
The chefing part to me is the like overall being able to organize the whole situation.
But have you had that moment where you broke somebody's story and allowed them to move away from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't remember anything super specific right now, but that one that came up all the time was that people still tell if I run into old Beach Greens customers in the street, people still tell me the same stories. Like I'm not because I live in Long Beach, right?
Sure.
So it's like, oh hi, oh you still like blew my mind about that carrot, or that apple or that beet. Like that happens all the time. With some of the food I've cooked, I don't really have any specific stories because when I'm inviting people in to eat, they're usually coming. I've done mostly events around cultural food. So they're coming in to eat Turkish food. They usually like it. They've been to Turkey. Sometimes they're dragged there by a friend, but usually not. So usually they're already pretty open and in within the food world, if that makes sense. Like I can't remember a specific story about somebody going, oh my God.
I imagine Turkish cuisine and Moroccan cuisine probably have a lot of parallels.
They have some Moroccan food uses more spices. Turkish
Okay.
food in there's depending on where in the country you are, Turkish food is different. Standard Western Turkish food, lots of olive oil, vegetables, and meats, and not a ton of spices or spiciness. The further east you go in the country, the closer you get to the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, Syria, all that, you get more spices and more spiciness. And Morocco also, it's kind of both in a way, just because of the history of the whole region, how it all went, but it has a bit more spices than traditional Turkish cuisine has.
So Moroccan food is the furthest geographically from America that I've ever
Right.
experienced in Morocco. Like I was in
Right.
Morocco, so I had
Right.
Moroccan food in Morocco, and
Right.
I was just surprised at how obviously it was different, but how many similar base ingredients there that were familiar.
Right.
So, it's
Mhm.
potatoes, it's
Right.
meat, it's lamb
Right.
instead of cow,
Right.
but it's
Right. Right.
just
Yeah.
cooked meat, cooked potatoes,
Mhm.
cooked carrots,
Yeah.
add a sauce, toss in some bread. It's
Yeah.
not coming in a plastic bag sliced and
Right.
with a logo on it, but
Right.
it I mean, I feel like, and I've watched enough reaction videos on YouTube now to know that every regional, right, two of my favorite channels are Irish people try fill in the blank, and then tribal people try fill in the blank. And every new dish, they're just like, oh, this is exactly like what we do at home, but
Right.
sort of slightly different. And it sort of made me
Right.
realize there really aren't that many.
No, there aren't.
Uh,
There's ingredients and arranged in different ways. And it's really interesting that you say that because how I teach people to cook from a base level, cooking from scratch. I say, take what you already know how to make. So take the ingredient, it's chicken and it's potatoes. Literally, I almost always start with chicken because people eat it so much. And I say, now switch out the flavor that you're using and just put in a different flavor. So
when you say flavor, I'm going to ask you,
a lot of times
flavor.
it's spices. Like
Okay.
I call it a flavor formula, and you can make it in a lot of different ways. But say one flavor formula will be like paprika and coriander and cumin and black pepper and garlic, right? That could be one thing. And I'm like, okay, you want to switch it up? Let's switch it up. Let's take out those spices and let's add in basil, oregano, garlic. And now you have something more Italian, for lack of a better word, right? This is how I kind of introduce this concept of cooking from scratch to people so that they can see like, oh, I already understand these ingredients. I know how to make it. Now I want to make something new. I can just kind of switch out the flavors. I look at cooking in a very modular way, if you will, especially in the beginning when I'm trying to get people like, I don't know how to cook from scratch. And so I say, okay, well, let's start with what you already do know, because the brain is easily latches onto what you already do know, and then just switch out the stuff you don't know. And then they start to get more comfortable with it and go from there. And that's my method for cooking from scratch, basically everything that I teach. And you've hit on it perfectly. You notice like, oh, these ingredients aren't much different.
I want to talk about the word cooking. Because because the idea of knowing how to cook or not knowing how to cook is funny.
Yeah, it is.
Like last night I made myself rice and peas and beans.
Right.
And I did it by reading the instructions on the packaging of everything I bought. So in my mind, that's not cooking. That's just, I'm just following instructions. If I purchase a piece of furniture from IKEA and I follow the instructions, I don't know how to build furniture.
Right.
I just did it. So is cooking just the accumulation of knowledge to the point where you don't need to read the ingredients?
I think that's
the instructions.
Right. I think that's cooking from scratch.
Okay.
And I think that's what people want to know how to do. Is that a lot of people feel super comfortable following a formula or a recipe, or like you said, you read the back of the box, which is basically a formula and a recipe, and you put it together. Great. And then people want to go, well, I want to add this, or I'm kind of bored that I always eat the same thing, but I'm terrified to add anything. Or the one time I added something different, it was the most disgusting thing I've ever had, and I'm never going to do that again. And so they get scared to kind of step out of the box of following the recipe, reading the back of the box. And to me, that's what cooking from scratch is about. You start to understand the components of cooking a little better and slowly start to add in little things with guidance, with guardrails on. And then within that, you start to say, oh yeah, I added that to this last time and it worked. Why don't I try it again? Because I know this about these two ingredients. I know that chicken is pretty bland and can take almost any thing, and that this other thing tends to be kind of bitter, and so I'm going to marry them. And that's what a chef is doing. They're thinking about flavors, they're thinking about techniques, they're thinking about how to develop flavors, but it's learned over time. Very few people walk into a kitchen just knowing how to put all these different aspects together and have an amazing, incredible dish.
I wasn't gonna ask this, but you triggered me with your chicken is bland comment, because it obviously it is, right? Like, or I don't know that it's bland, but at this point, it's so ubiquitous that it's like vanilla ice cream, right? Like if you took vanilla ice cream back to the 1200s and you gave it to somebody, it would be the most incredible thing. But it's so ubiquitous. This is like, we think of ice cream as vanilla ice cream. That's
exactly.
So I get in fights with people all the time about avocados because I have declared publicly that nobody actually likes avocados.
Right.
That avocados exist as a delivery method for the flavors you do like.
Right.
So you put it, you if you're making guacamole, well, you don't like avocados, you like all the other stuff that you're putting in the guacamole.
Lime and onion and all these
things. And then when people get really mad at me for saying it, they say, I eat avocado all the time. And I go, really? When was the last time you just randomly picked up an avocado, cut off a slice, and ate it plain? And they go like, oh, 2 weeks ago, for breakfast I had avocado with salt and pepper on it. And I go, aha, you like the two most popular spices in the history of mankind, that wars were fought over and whatever. So but then I had to force myself to admit that that's also true of potatoes.
Yes.
which hurt my feelings because I've never
Right.
eaten a raw plain potato.
Right.
I just like oil and salt and butter and cheese and whatever else I put on
Right.
the
Right.
potato. If people are nervous or scared to take those guardrails down,
Right.
can realizing that
Right. Right.
be a path to just like, oh, I just build my base of whatever I want to eat, and then I just add the things that I like eating. I like butter, so I'm gonna drown this piece of meat. But like when I see people make
Yeah.
steaks and they're, you know, coating it
Yes.
in butter, I'm just like, what are you doing?
And then that's where the nuance comes in, where the experience of like, well, I don't really know how much butter to add, and it was really greasy and oily, and what did I do wrong? It's like, well, you added too much butter. People won't necessarily know that right off the bat. And what I was going to say about the, oh, that is so funny. The avocado and the chicken thing. I mean, the reason I did the vegetables is because those vegetables that I was delivering were actually had flavor. I think that's a whole nother conversation. Whereas when you're getting really farm fresh vegetables, they actually do have a flavor. Like potatoes have a very particular flavor. Avocados have different flavors. You can tell when an avocado is a little bit old and rancid. You can tell different varieties of avocado, like based upon their butter content. Like these are all things that can be told. If the everyday person who loves avocado, if they're paying attention to that, and they just like salt and pepper, maybe not. I don't know. For me, the avocado thing is a texture thing. Like
Yeah, I
that's
don't
where
like
I
it.
get really hung up with a lot of food. I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, avocado's all right, I suppose, but I need a crunchy chip or some crunchy. Well, that's the thing. The delivery vehicle becomes like, oh, I'm eating healthy avocados, so I can have like 27 chips, right?
right, right.
That's exactly what you're talking about. Like, is it the other ingredients or is it the avocado itself? Or is it the fact people are like, oh, it's healthy for me, so I like it because I think it's healthy for me. And it's filling too. I mean, avocado is very satiating. Definitely.
I've just never
But
seen
do
anybody eat it.
people like it as much as they say they do? I mean, I don't know.
Like I
I
will
think
eat grapes, an apple, a
right,
pear, an
right,
orange,
right,
et cetera, peach and nectarine, et cetera. I've
right.
plain avocado. No, thank you. This is not for me.
It's salt and lime, definitely.
Let's talk about the textures though, because that going back to the ratatouille thing with the
Right,
explosions in the song and everything.
right,
When I was trying to lose weight, I sat down and I mapped out. I was like, all right, I'm going to eat less than 2,000 calories a day. So I'm going to eat the
right,
same thing every day. And because I'm a picky eater, it's no problem. I'm like, I don't care if I eat.
right,
So I started making turkey sandwiches, but I wanted that crunch, like you said.
right.
So I just started putting cucumber slices in it.
Yeah, that
And
works.
that,
Yeah,
for some reason, hacked my brain and was like, oh, I'm eating something crunchy. Perfect.
totally, totally.
And the cheese was in that. And so the taste of the cheese combined with and toasting the bread.
Right,
Two stupid things that didn't really change the flavor at all,
right,
but completely altered my
right,
experience.
right.
That must be a huge element of food prep.
Yeah, but they did change the flavor. If you toasted the bread, you concentrated flavor and you added a caramelization there. So
Okay.
you're getting rid of liquid in the bread. So basically, bread will have some additional water in it. When you toast it, it concentrates the flavor of it because the steam's rising off of it. So you're concentrating the flavor. There's probably a little bit of sugars in there, so making it more rich in flavor. And then the cucumbers are going to add crunch. They're going to add water. So
Which
if
I
you're
just took out by toasting the bread.
right, but if your turkey's kind of salty, right?
Yeah.
If it's like a lunch meat, then you're going to add that cucumber, you're going to get a crunch and you're going to get a nice like fresh feeling as well. So they seem like whatever, but those are the little things that you're thinking about. Somebody who's cooking from scratch is thinking about like, oh, I have all these wonderful fresh ingredients. How can I weave them and combine them together in a way that's like the most pleasing? And that's where when you go out to eat in a restaurant where the chef's incredible, they're hitting like all those parts of your brain and you're not even aware of it. But you take a bite and you're just like, I don't really know what just sometimes you know what happened and sometimes you don't. You're just like, wow, it's creamy and it's crunchy and it's salty and it's sweet and it's just the most balanced thing I've ever had in my life. But it's just a one moment in time.
You and I grew up with a bunch of people who feel about music the way you do about food.
This is true.
And
This
one
is
of
true.
the people that we knew came up with what I considered to be a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
The problem is you can only do it once.
Okay.
And after that, you're just ripping off the idea. And the idea he came up with was record your band playing. Print out a bunch of cardboard cutouts of yourselves at, playing the instrument, standing there like a band. Right. Book a gig, put the cardboard cutouts, in the performing area, right, and play the recording. And then that's your live musical performance. And I thought, okay, that as a sort of like performance piece, right, from like artistic, like, okay, very clever, very funny.
Right.
Unfortunately, once it's been done by anybody on the planet,
right,
anybody who does it after that is just copying it. Right. So if a chef devises a menu,
right,
and creates the dish,
right,
and then presumably teaches the staff or anybody right. else to prepare
right.
the meal, if you really enjoy it, are you enjoying the craft of preparing it, or are you right. enjoying the artistic creation of coming up with the idea?
I think both. And then I think every meal is really a situation in and of itself. To me, this goes to wine. Like, people talk about wine pairing and they say, like, well, I don't know what goes with what. And there's this whole thing that you're supposed to learn what wine goes with what and with what meal. And while there are definite guidelines, every meal that you have is going to be different. So a Zinfandel that went with this meal might not go with that same meal the next time, depending on what else you ate before it. Or, I mean, chances are it'll be pretty close, but every meal is its own separate experience, I guess is my point. So to answer your question, I think you're enjoying both things, because there's going to be variables that come in from the people that actually had their hands on it that day. But the original chef or the head chef had the idea, and his cooks are preparing it, his or her cooks are preparing it that day. So to answer your question, I think both.
I'm going to apply corporate speak, and I apologize in advance.
That's okay.
Can good meal ideation overcome substandard execution, and vice versa? Right. Can excellent execution overcome lazy or redundant meal ideation, if any of that made sense?
I think to a certain extent. I take it as, like, I go to someone's house and they have 3-day-old piece of chicken breast and some wilty lettuce and a can of tomatoes, and they're like, make an amazing dinner. And I'm like, I can make a dinner that tastes pretty good, but the chicken, I mean, not that it's rotten, it might taste a little old, the salad will be wilty, but I could probably I might be able to turn that into something else completely. I might be able to do something really creative with that can of tomatoes. So your dishes are as good most of the time as the ingredients that you start with. But again, it always depends on the situation. Like, are you talking about a high-end restaurant, or are you just trying to get a homemade dinner on the table that you're happy that you made and ate rather than opted to get fast food or something like that? So I think you have to really look at the situation that you're in terms of what is good food. What I focus on is, it's like 5 o'clock. You want something to eat that's homemade. You haven't really thought about it previously. You have some ingredients in the fridge. You're not totally sure what they are. This is my specialty. This is what I love to do. What do you do when you walk into that kitchen? You have like 45 minutes to an hour to make dinner. What do you do? That's my area of expertise. Because to me, for my ethos, it's doing your best to eat at home most days of the week for health reasons, for monetary, financial reasons, and just because homemade food usually tastes better if you're starting with fresh, non-packaged ingredients, like not super processed ingredients, I should say. Yeah.
If we're revisiting, the 1950s, 60s sitcom trope of like, oh no, the boss is coming home, like someone's coming to your house, you have to create an impressive meal. Not, you don't want to be seen pretentious or out of touch.
Right.
But it has to be quality. Right. How different is that meal from something you would make for your family, for somebody's birthday or something?
Me personally, not a whole lot different. I might add a couple extra side dishes or another little sauce or a special dessert or something like that. But a lot of my dishes play really well in both worlds, because that's the type of cook I am. I'm not super fussy. Like the Turkish food that you ate, or the Moroccan food that you ate, which is similar to Turkish food, straightforward, kind of plain ingredients, tasted good, judged up a little bit. You know how to make the food taste good.
I love that you used that word, by the way.
Judged?
Yeah. Fantastic word.
I don't know if that's good or not.
I love it.
Right. So it's yeah, that's the realm that I play in, is that kind of, this is going to sound funny. I like to cook, and but I've been doing it for a long time, and I really don't love spending forever in a kitchen. So I really like the way that I know how to add flavor really fast to stuff. Right? So I'm going to sear something, or I'm going to add a spice paste, which is like spices mixed with olive oil, and rub it on the meat. I have these little tips and tricks and things that I almost always do that bring out the most amount of flavor in the shortest amount of time. And that's where I play, because I don't play in restaurant land. I'm not, I'm not cooking in restaurants. I'm not even cooking as a caterer or for other people anymore. I'm just cooking at home, and I want a really good tasting meal, but I don't want to spend hours doing it. I'll spend a little bit of time. I enjoy it enough, but I don't want to wake up and go, oh shoot, I have to do this and I have to do that. No, I'm doing other stuff all day. I want to be able to just walk into the kitchen and cook something pretty dang good.
You strike me as the person who does not have the TikTok app on your phone.
I don't have the TikTok. I never got on the.
Don't. It's
I know.
Incredibly addictive and not useful at all. However, there was this video that went around and people were lambasting this poor woman. And her original video was, she was a baker. Okay. And she was in her bakery and she's filming herself while she's kneading dough or preparing something. I don't know.
Right.
And she's giving this story about, every time I tell people that I'm a baker, they always want to know, what's your favorite thing to bake?
Right.
And she sort of angrily says, like, nothing. This is my job. Like, there's no such thing as like my favorite thing to bake. This is what I do. It's not who I am. And then a bunch of people came back at her like, okay, but you just put a video of yourself baking, telling the world that you're a baker. Etc. But I mean, you must get that question. Is that sort of within the food prep world? That must be the number one annoying question.
It is so annoying of a question.
In that case, what's your favorite thing to make?
Right, exactly. And you know how I usually answer that question? I just tell people like, oh, I just make like Mediterranean food. And usually I'm distracting them, because people's answer to that is like, oh, I love Mediterranean food. And then they'll tell me their whole story about Mediterranean food. So it's a way to get the spotlight off of me, because I don't have a dish that I'm just like, oh my God, it's the most amazing thing ever. I'll tell you what I eat for my birthday every year. This is funny.
Yeah.
This is really funny. Oysters, because I love them. And everybody in my family hates them.
Yeah.
So they're like, Mom, what do you want for? I'm like, oysters. And then you're going to grow. You're gonna gag about the second one.
Avocados.
Pate. I absolutely.
I've actually never had
pate. It's absolute chicken liver pate. It's absolutely incredible. Most people can't stand it. These are the things I'm eating. Like, oysters aren't involved to make, but pate is a little bit involved to make. Do I make it? No. Otherwise, I'd just be eating a vat of pate. I'm sad. So I save it for my birthday. Most birthdays, they're like, what do you want? I'm like, oysters, and let's see if we can find somewhere that makes pate. And champagne. That's what I have.
That's, I would never have thought about it, but that's such an interesting flip way to approach the conversation. Right? Like, rather than ask a musician what's their favorite piece to play.
Right.
Like, what's your favorite piece to, like, what do you listen to?
Well, and for me, the whole point of this podcast, like, does it make logical sense to ask professional chefs, which I'm going to be doing, about what they cook if they're at home or, on a day off? They're usually not doing a lot of cooking on their day off, but
I would hope not.
Right. But like the things, it's what their go-to is, right? I don't go to making those things, but if I were to go to making something, I usually make, and it changes all the time. Now with the weather, I make a lot of like noodle salads. So I'll just put like garlic and ginger and scallions and whatever vegetables are in the fridge, and then cook some kind of noodle, spaghetti, soma noodle, ramen noodle, whatever I have. I'll dump it on top of all those vegetables, and then I'll add some kind of meat. It's shrimp, it's chicken, it's steak, like it's whatever. And then some soy sauce. Like that's my fresh, easy thing that I often will dump together.
2 quick questions, because I want to give us time to talk about this before I have to jet. You live in Long Beach. Long Beach is an incredibly diverse city.
Oh my gosh.
If somebody wanted to get into cooking, or if somebody wanted to learn how to cook, whatever that means, or if somebody wanted to expose their own palates to more sophisticated experiences, or their kids or whatever, like, is it helpful to just find if you've never had Thai food, or if you've never had Korean barbecue, or if you've never had Cambodian or pho or whatever, like, do you just start going and ordering randomly?
I think so. I think sometimes you can walk into a place too, if you're unfamiliar with it, and you can say, I've never been here. And they'll be like, oh, get number 1. Everybody loves number 1. Or number 7 is the most popular on the menu type of thing, like ask for advice in there. But I think absolutely. But I'm also very comfortable with that. Like you said, growing up here, it's not foreign to have Cambodian one way, Thai other way, 3 Mexican places this way, a Peruvian place over there. Like we're just so surrounded by the amount of different flavors and palates that we're spoiled. We can just go try anything any day. But I think that's the way to do it. Absolutely.
I found, and I don't know if this will be helpful to anybody. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's even going to hear this, but I went out for beers with a couple friends.
Yeah.
And there was a Korean barbecue food truck.
Right.
Now, I would never, of my own free will, go to a Korean barbecue place because I'm afraid of most foods.
Right.
But I was really hungry.
Yeah.
And everybody else was ordering. And I didn't want to look like a wuss, and I did want to eat. So I ordered something. It was unbelievable. It was delicious. It was so good.
Was it like rice and meat, or was there more to it than that? Yeah.
No, it was rice and meat in some sort of wrap. I don't know.
Oh, that sounds good.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was delicious. And now
was it a koji truck? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It was a koji truck, wasn't it? Yeah, and that's even fusion. I mean, that's Korean. That's like Korean barbecue and Mexican. They wrap everything like a taco or burrito, but it's all the Korean flavors. They're one of the OGs.
It was so good, and now I'm excited for that. So that like now I've got another peanut butter sandwich to add to my.
Well, it's the same. It's like, is it rice and meat? Is it potatoes and meat? It's just those base things that you're adding those flavors to. Yes, there's more to it. I don't want to make it so simple. No, it's not that simple, but those
but the joke about Italian food, right, is it's all just pasta, meat, and cheese, right? It's just or Mexican food
in this country. Country, I mean, Italian food in Italy is more regional and fresh, vegetable based, and some people do that here, but. Yeah.
So the next question, and we'll, I guess, wrap it up on this one, is when you and I were working together, and as long as I've ever known you, sustainability has always been a huge part of your approach.
Yeah.
Do you find that when people are more physically, emotionally, and mentally involved in knowing what goes in their body,
that
it enhances the experience of putting it in their body?
I think so. Absolutely. There's a mindfulness that goes along with it. And that's funny. I'm actually this summer, I'm doing I'm calling it a class, but it's a Facebook group I'm running for 9 weeks called The Soul of Cooking. And I'm basically going to be running through mindfulness and contemplative practices related to something called the alphabet of spiritual literacy. So I'll be going through gratitude and love and compassion and joy and all these different spiritual literacy words through the lens of food and cooking. So I think it's a deeper way to experience food, and I'm using it as a way to motivate and get people excited about cooking again, which is kind of the process that I've gone through over the last couple of years. I completely dropped food. I told everybody I was out of the food business, and I couldn't stand. I didn't cook for 6 months. I was like, I don't even want to think about food, do anything about food. I don't know what's going on, but don't talk to me about food. And then just a month ago, I was like, actually, no, I want to come back to this. I was ready to come back to this. And with that extra added component of mindfulness, which just adds a deeper level and a motivation. And people have lots of different motivations for cooking, whether or not it's to lose weight, take control of their health in general, because they feel it's more sustainable for the planet. There's 1,000 different reasons people do it. But yeah, I don't think food is just about cooking, or cooking is just about cooking, I'll say. Cooking is about so many other things, and gratitude is the kind of number one thing that I start with there.
So I'm just going to tag that with this thought. A friend of mine wound up becoming a rabbi.
Okay.
And I was asking him one day, we're, one of those 2 a.m. dumb conversations.
Right.
And I was saying, this whole thing about kosher, like, it always seems silly to me that we take these laws from whatever, thousands of years ago that nobody really knows anything about. And then we try and sort of reverse engineer, well, you couldn't store pork in the desert. So, and it's like, really, is that? And he had a totally interesting take on it, which I have moved forward with. And his attitude was this: it doesn't matter what the rules are.
Right.
The point of the rules is to make you focus on and pay attention to
exactly
what you put in your body and how you relate to what you put in your body. Like you said, mindfulness is what made me think of that.
Exactly.
And once I heard that, I was like, oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
You just wrap it up in some weird superstition and never explain it, and then whatever. But the intent appears to be just mindfulness. And
that is the intent. That is the intent. And from an anthropological perspective, trigonosis was really rampant back in those days.
Yeah.
So there is the whole thing to the non-pork in the desert thing. But yeah, absolutely. I think once you've been cooking for a long time, or it's a really good way to kind of bring more, as we get older, more joy and fulfillment to your life. Like, you discover cooking. I just don't think you're discovering how to put chicken in a pot. You're discovering the mindfulness that comes along with it, and that it's something that involves all 5 of your senses, which what some mindfulness practices are based off of is, what are you hearing right now? What are you seeing right now? What are you smelling right now? It's a way to come into this universal awareness that we don't usually use in our day to day. And that's one of the things I encourage people to do when they cook. When I'm standing there cooking, my back's to the stove and the pot's crackling with whatever's cooking in it, and I'm using all my senses. My back is turned because I can hear it. I know what's going on in the pot because I can hear what stage it's at and is cooking. And if I'm in the living room and something's cooking in the kitchen, I'm smelling. And I know if I start to smell it a certain way, obviously burnt's bad, but I can smell when it's starting to get done. So it's kind of an awareness, more of a fullness to life that you get to live from. And you can do that through food, which is what I find so cool.
Well, Aliye, I appreciate your time today in this pilot episode of Cooking from Scratch. And I encourage anybody that does hear this to follow your exploits.
Thank you. I appreciate it. If you're hearing this message, you've listened to our new episode all the way to the end. And for that, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. A few key takeaways from today's episode include how our palates and eating preferences can be developed over time, how Turkish and Moroccan food compare, the easy way to start cooking from scratch, and how mindfulness is an integral part of cooking. Thank you for listening to this episode from start to finish. If you have any questions about the things we covered in the show or would like to follow my projects, please find me on Instagram as Soul Space Chef or join my free Facebook group, The Soul of Cooking. Next week, we will talk about how to cook delicious low-carb and keto meals at home. To discuss the topic, I'll have the pleasure of hosting Chef İlkay Basugur of Fermentality and Nia Bakery. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and share this episode with your friends. If you're eager to dive deeper and learn some game-changing tips for effortlessly adding variety to your meals, don't miss my upcoming live masterclass called 6 Easy Ways to Quickly Add Variety to Your Meals. In this 90-minute training, I'll be sharing practical strategies and creative ideas to transform your cooking routine and give you back your time and energy on weeknights. Whether you're a busy professional, a home cook looking to mix things up, or just someone who loves great food, this masterclass has something for you. When you click the link in the show notes or visit www.fasteasydinners.com to reserve your spot today, you'll learn how to turn your everyday meals into something extraordinary. Until next time, keep cooking, keep experimenting, and keep enjoying every bite.